And a good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for tuning in tonight to Times Past, Beverly's Times Past. Our guest tonight, this evening, is Mr. Michael Casale, longtime Beverly High School teacher and a collector of old Beverly postal cards. Good evening, Mike.
Hi, Ted. How are you?
Nice to have you here.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And when I say longtime Beverly High School teacher, how many years are we talking about, Mike?
Well, in the Beverly school system, 39 years. And I taught United States history, economics and government at the high school for 13 of those years. And then moved into administration and spent the rest of my time as media director and director of technology.
I know you used to put out some programs down at the studio at Beverly High School.
Yes, we did. We began our television studio actually in 1968 with a 1-inch reel-to-reel Ampex tape recorder and one camera. And from that time it grew. And when cable came to Beverly, Continental Cable, they were, as part of the contract, outfitted part of that TV studio with editing equipment and so on, which they still have at the high school.
Do you miss it, Mike?
After spending so many years, of course, you do. Those were very good years. I enjoyed them. I enjoyed the students and the people I worked with. And so you do have a sense of missing it, yes.
Right. Your career actually goes back to when Beverly High School was up on Sawyer Road.
That's correct. My first teaching assignment was in the Beverly High School at the corner of Sawyer Road. And believe it or not, Ted, it goes back even further than that. Because my father took my picture at 6 months old at the pillar on the stairway of Beverly High School, right outside of Keith Manville's window. I still have that picture. So I started being around the high school at a very young age.
Yeah. Obviously, then you went to the Beverly schools growing up?
No, I did not.
You did?
No. I went to St. Mary's School, and I went to St. John's Prep.
And then off to...
And then I went to Merrimack College for my undergraduate degree.
I see.
And I did further study at BU in Northeastern, and I got a master's degree at Salem State.
I see. Now, was it 1965 that the move was made from Sawyer Road to the new present-day high school?
The move was made in actually two parts. In 1964, in September, the vocational school moved up to the new building. And then in 1965, in June, the class that was graduating, we had to move up to that building just to get them acquainted and move in for just a very short time. And then the school opened in September.
Yeah. Most of the old teachers, Mike, now have gone. You must have started with the likes of John Page and Charlie Walsh. And,
that's correct. John Page was my department chairperson. And I worked with John Page for a long time. I also worked with Claude Patton. He was, because at the time I was teaching at the high school, I was teaching United States history in the high school. I had college prep U.S. history and business history, and I was teaching economics and government in the vocational school. So my time was split between the two schools.
Yeah. And I know of late, the people such as Fred Hammond and Dick Batchelor, they're all retiring now, Mike, so
yes,
the guard is changing up there at Beverly High School.
Yes, it is. It's time, and time marches on.
Surely does.
Yeah.
Tell us, if you will, and we're talking with Mike Casale, ladies and gentlemen. Tell us, Mike, how this photograph collection came into existence.
Well, it started when I was teaching history at Beverly High School. One of the methods that I used to use in teaching United States history was to teach national history in a local perspective. So that if we were studying topics in American history, I always tried to teach them in a way that reflected what was happening locally. So if we were talking about, for example, a Revolutionary War, we would teach it in a way so that the students would understand what Beverly people were doing at that particular time. And different students would do different projects, and they would bring things to class. For example, my first exposure to Stone's history of Beverly was that way. A student brought in a copy of an original Stone's history from 1842. And on other occasions, I ran across the postcards, and it piqued my interest, and we began collecting postcards and copying postcards. And that started, I would say, in the 1960s at the old Beverly High School.
And you've been adding to your collection ever since?
Yes, you find them at yard sales. Sometimes friends of mine would be at a yard sale in a different locale and see a Beverly postcard and pick it up and send it to me. People have left me some.
Yeah.
Some people that I knew that had a shoebox full of old postcards that they actually used with messages on the back and so on. When they had no longer use for them, they'd give them to me.
Penny postcards, we used to call them.
Penny postcards, that's correct,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, that's great, the fact that you kind of localized the people and the events as you went through your courses. I'm thinking of people like Reuben Kennison and people, the local people who actually
Yes.
had a living part in the Revolutionary War. For
That's
example.
true. And to take that one step further, to carry it one step further, one of our first video projects that we had at the high school when we began doing this sort of thing was the commemoration in 1976 with the Alarmless Company of Danvers and a ceremony at Reuben Kennison's grave, which we videotaped in half-inch open reel tape.
Very
So
nice.
that's one of the things we did. And the students all would know it because as part of their assignments they'd have to find where Reuben Kennison's house was and where the grave site was. It's interesting to note that when you're doing that on local history, the students' interest just perks right up. For example, when they all say that Beverly was part of Salem, they knew Beverly was part of Salem, but they thought that when Beverly was incorporated, it was all of Beverly. And they didn't know it ended at McKay Street. And it wasn't until 1752 that that whole Ryle side section was added. And somewhere on McKay Street near the Shoe Clubhouse, there's a marker that marks, I don't know if it's still there or not, but there was a marker there that marked the boundary of Salem and Beverly. So when you tell students that, their interest perks up and they get bitten.
Well, you know, Mike, postal cards, I think, are perhaps one of the main ways of learning what Beverly actually looked like, or any community for that matter, because back in the days of the early photography, and I'm thinking now post-Civil War, and there weren't that many pictures available, or that have survived anyway, that come down through the ages.
That's true.
And the postcards that were printed out really are a record of how things looked around here.
That's absolutely correct. And most of those were printed in Europe. And a lot of them, today you know with computers what you can do with photographs. And at that time, they used to doctor up the photographs a little bit, as you'll see when we get through, we're looking at some of the photographs. Overhead trolley lines disappear out of a picture. You'll see a trolley car and you wonder, how does the trolley go?
Yeah.
And it's because they've taken the lines out. So it was a business venture as well as a record of what things looked like. And a way of communicating with people.
Yeah.
It was a record of the time.
Yeah. Interesting you say they'd send them off to like Germany to be printed. I never could figure that out, Mike. I used to see them, or I have seen them with Brooklyn, New York, little notations at the bottom, why they wouldn't have done it locally. Any thoughts on that?
None really with any expertise. Perhaps it was the fact that their technology was a little bit ahead of ours.
Right.
And with the Industrial Revolution beginning over in Europe, they were maybe that far ahead in photography, because photography was in its infancy just around the Civil War with Matthew Brady and so on.
Right.
so that perhaps they were that much ahead with color photography, because you didn't see too many black and white postcards.
You certainly didn't. And this reminds me of a series that I did with Harold Boothroyd from Wenham. Harold came across a series of glass plates that was left by Benjamin Conant. I don't know whether you're familiar with him or not, Mike. He was a fellow that lived in Wenham, and he was a Civil War veteran, and from the period of 1890 through about 1920, when he began to become old and infirm, he went around starting here in Beverly, through Wenham, through Hamilton, into Ipswich, and a little bit beyond, and he took pictures about every street and every house that sat on those streets, and they're all today in the Wenham Museum, preserved by Mr. Boothroyd. Yeah. Really a marvelous way of looking back 100 years at the community.
Well, Wenham Museum has a fine collection. And in fact, one of the first schoolhouses in Beverly, which was a proprietor's schoolhouse, was located on Beckford Street at number 34. And that schoolhouse, which later became the Washington School District, the glass plate of that building is in the Wenham Museum.
Oh.
And so they have a marvelous collection there.
Well, this evening now, you've brought along some postal card pictures for us to look at. We're going to take ourselves a little trip from the harbor area, from the bridge area, and we're going to wander up Cabot Street. Okay. Hopefully we'll reach the Oddfellows building before the hour's time is up. So why don't we take a look, Mike, at the first photograph that we have here, and I think we're looking at the old Beverly-Salem Bridge.
The old Beverly-Salem Bridge. Actually, the photograph is taken from standing right in the middle of the bridge, and you're looking toward Beverly. When you look at it, of course, you compare it to the new bridge, but those of us that remember the old bridge, it really hasn't changed much from the time the bridge was built. However, at the time, and it was a corporation that built that bridge, and they charged tolls and so on, the bridge is very important, as well as the incorporation of Beverly, because prior to 1667, 68, when Beverly was incorporated, the only way to get to Salem was to travel by a ferry. And the people trying to go to Sunday services would have to travel across on a ferry and go up the North River to the First Church in Salem. And of course, doing that all the time, people are bound to either fall out of the boat or drown or whatever happens at that time. So that was the impetus for Beverly trying to become incorporated. And so eventually a bridge was built, and it was an impressive undertaking. It didn't take very long to build it. And in fact, it was one of the sites that George Washington visited on his tour of the United States in 1789. And at the time, it was regarded as the longest bridge in America.
Yeah. It's noted that he stopped actually on the bridge and inspected it very carefully. He was very impressed with the structure.
Right.
And this was put up about, what, 1788, Mike?
Somewhere in the 1780s.
Yeah.
And it was a draw. It was a drawbridge at the time.
State-of-the-art bridge for
its time. And it's one of the reasons that he stopped to inspect it. Yeah. Because if you remember, George Washington originally was a surveyor and worked in construction and so on, so it would pique his interest.
Great. Next picture up is another view, slightly off to the right a little bit, but still looking in the same direction.
We're looking in the same direction. And in looking at this picture, we're looking toward Beverly, and you could make out probably in the distance the towers from the Girdler Coal.
Absolutely.
And as a child, I think probably most anyone who grew up around Beverly used to love to see those little cats going on the tracks, dumping coal in the big, huge coal piles with the ships out there, the cargo ships carrying the coal. Yep. And it would almost look like one of the toys you'd see in a toy store today, with all the little cats going up almost looked like a roller coaster.
Right. I know I was mightily impressed with those collier boats that used to come in. I used to get out to Hospital Point and stand out there on the point and watch the ships as they came around. And I couldn't get over how huge they looked like,
the size,
to be able to wiggle into that little tiny space down there at the harbor. But there they were.
And then, of course, later on, Gulf oil was there, and those huge tankers used to come in and tie up at Tex Point, which you can see in the next picture. That we have,
Actually, mentioned the fact that we have the car tracks are noted here on both of these pictures that we're looking at.
yes,
On the right-hand side, going from Beverly towards Salem.
Yep.
And originally, Mike, they were the horse car tracks, were they not?
that's right. That's right.
I believe back in around the Civil War days of 1862 or 3, the first horse cars were put into operation. And then I think probably around 1897 or thereabouts, when electricity was in full use, they converted to the electric cars.
To the electric. And at the same time, of course, in 1840, the railroad had come through, so that's over on the other side of that bridge, which most people will remember.
Yeah. Yeah, the trolleys ran, and we have a picture that we're going to put up on the screen. That the last car ran in 1937 down Cabot Street, and that was the end of the history of the trolley system.
And in some parts of Cabot and Rantoul Street, the tracks are still there.
Yeah, especially when they're doing construction down there.
You'll find them.
When they're jackhammering away, you look under the top part there, and you can see all the old cobblestones, and sometimes you see a piece of the track there.
That's right.
Really brings back some memories.
A lot of the track was taken up in the Second World War, and
For scrap.
For scrap.
Yep.
And I can remember a whole section on Rantoul Street between Pond Street, we'll say, and Roundy. I can remember hearing the jackhammers and seeing them taking up those pieces of track to melt down for the war effort.
They were scrap happy back in those days. They'd take anything that they get their hands on.
And a lot of times they used to do things just to keep people busy.
Yeah.
For example, as an elementary school student, I can remember the big milkweed hunts. We had to have milkweed, and we'd bring them in these big satchels. And we needed the milkweed because they were going to make parachutes out of the milkweed.
Parachutes. Yeah.
But of course they weren't.
Yeah.
They were just, we did this because this was part of the war effort.
Yeah.
And everybody was involved in it. For example, I have a picture back home of a Jeep that the Brown School saved enough tin cans and scrap iron for, so that this was their Jeep as it came off the assembly line. Is a picture of the Brown School, Beverly, Massachusetts, and it was the Jeep that they put together with their collections.
Yeah.
So all the school children were involved in this effort.
Yeah.
I always remember the milkweed.
They would gobble up like the Frick fence down at Beverly
That's right.
Farms. That went to the cause.
That's
there was
right.
a couple of howitzers up on Wardell Park. They all grabbed them and off they went.
The old cannons from Independence Park
That's right.
was another one that they took. Everything was into that effort. That's correct.
Speaking of cobblestones, as I did a minute ago, I'm always amazed at the amount of labor that must have gone into building a cobblestone street. Think of it, brick by brick by
That's
brick.
right.
And those red brick sidewalks that we can still see in front of the Historical Society today.
Most of those, of course, a lot of the bricks were made in this area, but a lot of the cobblestones were ballasts on the ships that came
Sailing
over.
ships.
Yeah. In fact, there's a pile of cobblestones now over at the Cummings Center, I think, that they've either dug up or found or done something. Yeah.
Okay, we have one more picture from the bridge area here. Mike, can you talk about this one?
That's a picture. Actually, this picture would be taken, you'd be on the bridge looking toward Tex Point and the Jubilee Yacht Club. And one of the things I remember about this is the rowboats. The rowboats were all tied up in a string from bow to stern. And if you wanted to rent a rowboat, that's what you did. You went down and you'd rent it, and they'd pull one boat in, and that would be the boat to rent. And then eventually that line would get down to no boats. And you go out to, people would take and row around the harbor, go flounder fishing or whatever.
Fish for their supper.
Fish for their supper, that's right.
Little did they know, Mike, what was lurking out there.
That's true. That's true.
This next picture coming up, I'm amazed at the lack of, water actually that we see. It's definitely at low tide here, right?
Yeah, it is at low tide, and this is also looking toward Beverly, but you're on the Danvers side of the bridge at this point. And as you know, depending on the alignment of the moon and so on, you do get flood tides, and you do get these ebb tides that are real low.
Yeah.
And that's probably what that was there. I don't think I don't think there was any kind of construction where they dammed it up or anything like that. I just think it's an excessively low tide.
Yeah. With those underpinnings exposed as they are, the bridge, compared to the, as we say, the new bridge today, looks rather fragile, doesn't it?
It certainly does, but it certainly lasted.
It did.
Because
indeed.
they talked about a new bridge for hundreds of years.
Oh, my father, who was in school, Beverly High School back in the 20s, he always said they were going to build a bridge,
Yeah.
but he never saw it.
No, it got to be a joke.
Okay, we're still in the harbor area now, Mike.
Yep, and this next picture is the old fish wharf in Beverly, and that was on Cabot Street as you begin to head down toward Water Street. And again, in the summertime when the mackerel were running, you could go down and get on one of those floats and get a bamboo pole and a jig and catch fish and mackerel and so on. Of course, these pictures are taken earlier than that, but it's in the same general location. That whole area has changed now.
With the big marina down there.
There's a big marina and Harbor Master headquarters and the Veterans Memorial Bridge. That has all changed. And of course, the McDonald's is no longer there. McDonald's wasn't there when we were going fishing for mackerel either, but that area has changed.
Rumor has it there were more fish to be caught back in those old days than the present day.
It seems to be,
but
it's also it could be like the snowstorms we used to have when we were young. Why, it would snow 4 and 5 feet at a time, wouldn't it?
Sure would. Sure would. The next picture, I think, is probably in the same area, Mike.
Yes, it is. It's just down a little bit, and that's a picture of Foster's Wharf. And of course, the harbor of Beverly was an excellent harbor because it was secure, more so even than Salem Harbor. It was well protected. And during the Revolutionary War, the prizes were brought into Beverly Harbor because they could be protected from
the British ships could not get in there.
That's correct.
Do their damage.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now let's go to Cabot Street, shall we? We're at the lower end here.
Here we are at the lower end of Cabot Street, and we're looking from Edward Street toward town.
Okay.
A couple of interesting notes here. If you're looking at that, Ward's Fruit Factory would be on your right, and but on the left-hand side, there's a convenience store now.
Little Peach.
Little Peach. Behind that is a big old house, and I don't know whether people remember this or not, but that house was moved from the corner of Elliott and Rantoul Street to there, to behind the Little Peach store.
Yeah.
And there's an empty lot there's a bank now on the lot where that house used to be at Rantoul and Elliott. I think it's a Century Bank or something. Yeah. But that big house was moved from Elliott Street to that location. I really can't put a date on it. I don't quite remember, but I remember the house being moved.
Right. Right, and we see the old trolley track coming.
The track is heading down that way. And some of those houses that you see there are still standing.
They surely are.
Further on up, as you get up toward beyond Edward Street and up a little ways, there's another big house that was moved. And that house, it's just been recently renovated, and that house originally sat at 235 Rantoul Street, where Jacqueline Towers sits now. And there was those two houses,
Bell
Shoe Factory,
right.
And one of those houses, I think it was 233, was demolished, but 235 was moved up to Cabot Street. And it's sitting, as you're looking at this picture, it's on the left-hand side off Cabot Street.
They did a lot of that in those days. They relocated houses rather than to tear them down.
That's correct. And in fact, just recently, they just moved a house in Beverly to, I think from Centerville to Access Road. Yeah. So it happens.
Yeah. Now, Cabot Street, of course, was named for a member of the Cabot family. I believe it was George Cabot, who the street gets its name from. And this was back in the 1750s, I think, when the street was kind of laid out and became known as Cabot Street. Next picture, Mike, where we're moving along toward downtown Beverly here.
This picture is Cabot Street, and you're by Central Street. And the building immediately on your right is the building that's the home of the Historical Society. And on the left-hand side, of course, would be the area that used to be the Beverly Times, 110 Cabot Street, Railroad Avenue.
Yep.
And then across the way, there used to be Carl's Hardware store.
Yep.
And Carl's Hardware, there was a tremendous fire there one afternoon. In the middle of the afternoon, the whole front of that store just blew apart. And that tremendous fire destroyed that building.
Yeah.
And then down the next block was where Tompkins was.
Yep.
And there was a fire there as well. And right on the corner of that, there was a shoe repair place, Christopher's Shoe Repair, that was right on that corner.
And of course, that later on became the Bowler Mat Christopher's down on River Street.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Peter and Arthur, their sons.
That's correct.
Yep. You mentioned the corner of Railroad Avenue. I think there was a store there by the name of O'Keefe's. It was a grocery store there. Fred Foley mentioned that he worked there as a...
It's amazing how many grocery stores there were. As we've just moved up Cabot Street from the lower end, we've already gone by, right off the top of my head, I can think of 3 of them.
Yep.
There was Archivades Market and Cullivan's Market, and and you just go on the line. But there were markets all over Beverly.
Florence Market.
Florence Market. Yep. That's correct.
Marston and Sturtevant down where the where the old Connex building used or still stands on the corner of Pond Street there.
Yep.
A lot of food stores.
Heafy's Market. There were City Hall Cash Market. There were there were markets for everybody.
All there and all gone today.
That's
Mike.
right.
They're all gone today. You mentioned the Cabot building off to the right here. This was the house of John Cabot, which was built in 1781, and he was one of the 3 Cabot brothers that were very prominent here in Beverly. And the house eventually fell into the hands of the bank, which became the Beverly National Bank.
Beverly National Bank, 1810. I think it's the 10th oldest bank in America.
Yep.
And that was. The National Bank was quite a political football at the turn of that century. Alexander Hamilton, of course, was for a national bank, and a lot of the state banks did not want a national bank, and it caused quite a bit of political controversy at that time. But the Beverly National Bank is the 10th oldest in the United States. Yeah. Quite a legacy.
Yeah, the old vault is still downstairs
still there.
in the building there where they used to stash their...
Right down in you lift the trap door and go down,
Okay, I think we can leave this one and go on to the next photograph.
Next one, the Mason Building. That's on the corner of Cabot and Washington Street. And that whole building, you mentioned the Christopher brothers. The bowling alley was in the basement of that building. And along with, to the side where the credit union is today, the Strand Theater, the Beverly Ice Cream Parlor, Murray's Billiard Academy, were all lined up in that area. And I imagine a number of people remember walking down Washington Street to pay their telephone bill.
Absolutely.
Because the telephone company business office was located in that